Shalom and welcome back to Israel with Aline. Today we are in the beautiful Caesarea Maritima, one of the most beautiful places in all the land of Israel, but where some of the most terrible men in biblical history lived. We will visit King Herod's palace together, see where Pontius Pilate lived, and enter Paul's newly discovered prison to learn what he did in this city's underground chambers. And to go on this beautiful and terrifying adventure today, we have a very special guest. So everyone say shalom, my father Jorge.
Thank you, Aline. Shalom, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be with you again.
So if you are ready, let's get started.
Caesarea Maritima. It was built more than 2,000 years ago, a little over 2,000 years ago, by King Herod the Great.
Exactly. The Great is a bit of a strange name to call such a bloodthirsty person. The story of Herod is marked by massacres, both of others and of his own family. We remember the biblical story when Jesus is born in Bethlehem and Herod orders all the boys in that region to be killed. But there are also proven accounts that Herod murdered part of his family. He killed 2 of his sons, his wife, and then his mother-in-law. I mean, he was truly a terrible and bloodthirsty man, and he was the one who founded this beautiful city. And Herod built this place as a pagan city, with Caesarea intended to be the center of idolatry in the land of Israel. And we can see this very clearly through the archaeology of this city. Herod fills the whole city with statues, with images of worship. And look, for example, at the size of this foot, and so we can only imagine what the original size of the statue was. And not only the statue, he also builds pagan temples here. The main pagan temple in Caesarea was dedicated to the goddess Roma and to Augustus. And all of life in Caesarea, its entire daily routine, revolved around Roman life and paganism. It wasn't just literal idolatry, but Herod also built theaters here with pagan shows and places for chariot races. There were also gladiator fights here, bathhouses, people completely naked. And now I want to take you to see the heart of Herod here in Caesarea, which was his palace. And here by the Mediterranean Sea, King Herod builds his palace as a vacation retreat. That's right, the main palace where King Herod actually lived was in the capital, in Jerusalem. However, he built another palace here. In fact, we have written records that this was Herod's favorite place to live. So, just like today, just as some people have a house by the beach, back then King Herod had a gigantic multi-story palace here by the sea, and we're going to go inside it.
Well, guys, take a look. What an obvious place Herod chose to build his palace, a wonderful place. And look, in the palace there was this pool here, and in the middle an island with a pagan statue. And look at these preserved mosaics, and extremely luxurious for the time.
And this private palace had 2 floors. What we see are simply the remains that survived from the lower floor. But it had all the luxury of the time. However, something happens. A few years after the death of King Herod, the ones who start ruling Judea are pagan Romans. And now a pagan Roman, where do you think he will want to rule?
Yes, what happened in the year 6 after Christ? Imagine how long ago that was. The Romans moved the capital from Jerusalem here to Caesarea.
Exactly. For those who don't know, Caesarea was the capital of Judea for centuries and later also the capital of all Israel. And this palace specifically becomes not just another vacation palace for the kings, but actually becomes the seat of government. And another terrible man also lived here. And that's what I want to show you. Let's go.
Let's go.
One of these Roman governors who lived here was called Pontius Pilate, and we know him very well also because of the Bible, because he was the man who judged and sentenced Jesus to death by crucifixion. Pontius Pilate literally lived in this palace, in this place where we are walking right now. And archaeology proves this to us because during excavations at this site here in Caesarea, this stone was found. The original is so important that it is preserved inside the Israel Museum. But here we can see a replica of the stone that was found. And the following is written here: Tiberium Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea. This means Tiberium was built by Pontius Pilate, the prefect, that is, the governor of Judea, and that's exactly what we know from the Bible. Pontius Pilate lived here, and he was the governor of this whole region of Judea. And in this case, it says here that he built the Tiberium. What is the Tiberium? We have no idea. By the name, we understand that it was some construction here in Caesarea in honor of Tiberius, who was Caesar in Rome at the time. But the construction itself, we don't know what it was. And what really matters is that in this palace where we are walking now, the terrible King Herod the Great lived for part of the time, and also the terrible Pontius Pilate.
Thanks, Daddy.
I live in Jerusalem. Every day I walk these streets, the same stones and the same ground where King David walked. I'm holding soil from the Temple Mount. This was carefully rescued by archaeologists in the 90s in the Sifting Project. Temple Mount soil is the only entity authorized to verify and certify its authenticity and origin.
I'm so happy it's so beautiful and special, but beyond that, it has such deep meaning. I'm carrying with me a rare piece of history from the holiest place in Jerusalem.
It's got everything: our faith, our family, something we'll carry for generations.
I think it's a piece every Christian should own while it's still possible.
Every piece comes with a signed certificate, proving that you are among the very few who will ever own this treasure. Click the link in the description below or scan the QR code to receive your living connection to biblical history. For my followers, wherever you are, shipping is completely free. Shalom. And now, let's get back to the video. But not only terrible people passed through this palace. Paul was also here. But his story in this place actually begins far from here. When Paul was on his missionary journeys, for years he traveled from nation to nation, from city to city, preaching the gospel. However, after a few years, he feels that he should go to Jerusalem. But he knew that by going he would be persecuted. But even knowing that, he still sets out on a journey to Jerusalem. And after a violent riot in the temple, he was arrested by the Romans. The Romans actually arrest Paul, at least at first, to help him. because they knew he was a Roman citizen. And Paul was arrested and taken to the fortress of Antonia, which is exactly the same place where Jesus was judged and condemned by Pontius Pilate. But Paul's imprisonment was not the end of his problems. It was just the beginning, because at that moment, a group of 40 men gathered to plan Paul's death. And that's why the Romans transferred Paul to Caesarea in the dead of night, escorted by 470 soldiers. And in the morning they arrive in Caesarea, and Paul is brought to the government headquarters. And where was that? Exactly here in the palace, as we mentioned. But more specifically, he is taken to this room, which is called the Praetorium, the Judgment Hall, and the meeting place between Paul and the then Roman governor Felix. And Felix's decision was to keep Paul imprisoned. And it is written in the Bible that Felix orders him to be imprisoned in Herod's Praetorium. And this is exactly the Praetorium, and we know that it was built by King Herod the Great a few decades earlier. But where exactly was Paul imprisoned? For many years, no one knew. And I, as a guide for many years here in the land of Israel, have accompanied many groups here in Caesarea as well. And I remember that I used to tell the groups, this is the location of the Praetorium. And I can tell you that Paul's imprisonment must have been here nearby, as it is described in the Bible. But we didn't know exactly where it was. We just knew it had to be nearby. That was until not long ago, when new archaeological excavations revealed something incredible. That right down here in the palace's underground chambers, there is what? A prison. So Paul's prison was found, and it matches the way it's described in the Bible. I mean, next to the Praetorium, Paul was imprisoned, and now we're going to go in and see Paul's prison. I want you to look back here at this whole area where the columns are. This is the palace, the government headquarters. Also right next to it is the area where we were, which is the Praetorium. And here, right next to us, there are stairs that go down to the beginning of a tunnel, and this tunnel goes underneath the palace. Exactly, and it leads to the prison, Paul's prison.
Aline, you know, while you were talking, I was thinking about how many times I've already come here to Caesarea Maritima, right? They're countless, some more recent, but I'm always impressed by how archaeological excavations are always bringing us new information and new confirmations, like the one we're about to visit now.
I mean, you remember this place too.
Without the excavation, right?
Exactly, we were following along. We came here many years ago when we used to say, we know it's around this area, but we don't know exactly where. Then, we saw excavations happening, but when the excavations were happening, they didn't say what it was. And now, really, just a short time ago, this place was officially inaugurated and open to the public. And that's why we'll be able to show it to you this way.
Okay, shall we go?
Let's go, everyone.
This area is very interesting because when it was built, you can notice these ruins that here, look at this plaster. This was like a cistern, but later it was turned into a large prison.
This place could hold dozens of prisoners? It was much bigger than what we see here because the original shape of the prison was like the shape of a T. This first wing is where we are now, and there was a narrowing here. You can see that this part is narrower, and from here, 2 more wings extended, 1 to each side. However, this area here has not been excavated yet. Come closer. You can see that literally it's full of earth here. So, in the future, God willing, archaeologists will also come to remove this barrier they put up, which is temporary, and continue excavating. And reveal the complexity, reveal the entirety of this place. But we are now, without a doubt, inside the prison where Paul was held. And he stayed here, nothing more, nothing less than 2 years. And we also have records of other people who were imprisoned here, as well as the inscription of a Christian prisoner on which it is written, Lord Jesus, help Procopia, which was her name.
This is an interesting prison because it was temporary, Aline, wasn't it? Up here was the trial, and people were held for a while until the trial, and according to the verdict of the trial, they could be sentenced to death, to prolonged imprisonment somewhere else, or to be released. That was the spectrum of possibilities as it still is today.
Exactly. The idea of this prison was not for people to serve a sentence of several years here, like in the case of Paul, especially since we are right next to the government complex. They didn't want to have a huge number of prisoners right under the governor's feet. It was more practical to bring the person here, have them judged, and then send them to their future destination, depending on the outcome of the trial. All the time there were prisoners coming in and out of this place, and the soldiers and prisoners saw Paul here for 2 years. Maybe it could have seemed to them that Paul had simply been forgotten here. But what Paul did know is that everything would happen according to God's plan. And Paul was arrested several times during his journey. In Philippi, in Jerusalem, in Caesarea, and finally in Rome. And it was precisely from inside prison that Paul wrote some of his epistles. We can also see this reflected in what he writes in his letters. I, Paul, write this greeting in my own hand. Remember my chains, grace be with you. Pray also for me, that whenever I speak, words may be given me, so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains. I also want you to know, brothers, that the things that happened to me have actually contributed to the advancement of the gospel, so that the whole Praetorian Guard and everyone else knows that I am in chains because of Christ. And there is a possibility that some of these letters were written from inside this prison. First, because we know he had time, he spent 2 years imprisoned here. And second, also inside this prison, he had certain freedoms. And Felix ordered the centurion to keep Paul in prison, but to give him some freedom and allow his friends to serve him. And it was exactly these visitors who could bring him the necessary materials to write the letters. After all, parchment and ink were not something easily accessible at that time like they are today. So the visitors could bring him what he needed to write the letters, and then also take these letters and act as messengers, delivering these letters to the Christian communities to which they were addressed. What we do know is that most of the letters were written in prison in Rome. However, there is a possibility that perhaps some of these letters were written right here, where we are now, in the prison of Caesarea. After 2 years in this prison, Paul appeals to Caesar because as a Roman citizen, it was his right to be judged before Caesar. And from here, he leaves on his way to Rome. Paul then begins his last missionary journey, but this time as a prisoner. And he never set foot in the land of Israel again, as he ended his days by being executed in Rome. Caesarea is a city of extremes. On the outside, we see the beauty, but when we study it deeply, we also see the complexity of its stories. Today we talk about the suffering of Paul in this city. But we can also remember that a few years earlier, Caesarea was where Peter baptized the first Gentile, the centurion Cornelius, and opened the doors of the gospel to all nations. And this made possible Paul's missionary journeys and later his letters to different churches and peoples.
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please don't forget to give a like to support my daughter, Aline.
I hope you enjoyed today's video. See you next week. Thank you, Dad.
You're welcome.